Once hailed as the woman who shocked the world, Holm now finds herself in a very different spotlight. At 41 years old, the former boxing world champion and UFC superstar isn't chasing titles anymore. She's chasing purpose. The same crowd that once roared her name now watches in silence as defeat, age, and pain begin to cast their long shadow. What happened to the woman who head-kicked her way into history? And why are even UFC executives now gently suggesting she step away? This isn't just a story about fights lost. It's about what happens after the lights fade, the body breaks down, the calls stop coming, and the world slowly forgets the legend you once were. But for Holly, there's still a fight left, just not the one she trained for. Because when your whole identity is built on winning, what do you do when life starts handing you nothing but losses? Before Holm ever knocked out a UFC champion, she was just a preacher's daughter growing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Her life was quiet, structured, almost ordinary, rooted in small-town values, Sunday sermons, and the kind of humble beginnings that usually lead to anything but international stardom. Yet even as a child, something burned beneath the surface, a need to compete, a need to test herself. She wasn't just athletic, she was restless. Gymnastics, soccer, even diving. Holly tried it all, but nothing stuck. Not until she walked into a local kickboxing class at 16 years old. That's when her life started to shift. The man who spotted her potential was Mike Winkeljohn, a former kickboxing champion who immediately saw that Holly wasn't like other girls. She had speed, coordination, and a willingness to take a hit. More importantly, she had the kind of discipline you can't teach. While most teenagers were out partying, Holly was in the gym, sharpening her jab, perfecting her footwork, and obsessively training before school. And then, in her early 20s, she made a leap that would change her future. She turned pro in boxing. What followed was a whirlwind. Holm dominated. She racked up wins, belts, and respect across multiple weight classes. Over the next decade, she became a world champion in 3 divisions. People called her the female Mayweather for her technical style and elite conditioning. She won Ring Magazine's Female Fighter of the Year twice. Promoters and pundits started calling her the best female boxer on the planet. But what most people don't realize is how hard that path was behind the scenes. Holly wasn't raking in millions. Women's boxing didn't have the UFC's spotlight. Her paychecks were modest, the recognition limited. And so, with nearly 40 pro boxing matches under her belt and little else to prove, Holly did something that confused everyone. She walked away from boxing and walked straight into the most dangerous cage in sports. At almost 30 years old, she switched careers entirely, and that's where her second life began. Why would someone leave dominance for uncertainty? What was she trying to prove? Or was she simply running from the realization that her time on top, at least in boxing, was quietly coming to an end? When Holm announced she was transitioning to MMA in 2011, even some of her biggest supporters raised eyebrows. She was almost 30. She had no wrestling background, no jiu-jitsu pedigree, and yet she wasn't dabbling. She was all in. Most fighters enter mixed martial arts in their early 20s. Holm was already a veteran in another sport, but what she lacked in youth, she made up for in obsession. Her work ethic was legendary. She wasn't just hitting pads, she was drilling takedown defense for hours, sparring with killers at Jackson Winkeljohn MMA, the gym known for shaping champions like John Jones and Georges St-Pierre. She debuted in a regional promotion and tore through her first opponents. Knockouts, head kicks, perfect combinations. She looked like a striker from the future. She wasn't just adapting, she was evolving. It wasn't long before she caught the attention of the UFC. Dana White signed her in 2015, but the hype was cautious. Her early UFC wins were solid, but unspectacular. 2 decision victories didn't exactly scream superstar. Fans were skeptical. Was she just a good boxer pretending to be a complete fighter? Then came the call that changed everything. In late 2015, the UFC was desperately looking for a challenger for their undefeated megastar, Ronda Rousey. Rousey wasn't just a champion, she was a media phenomenon. Magazine covers, movie roles, talk show appearances. She was demolishing opponents in under a minute. Many fighters were too scared to take the fight. Holly wasn't. The match was booked for UFC 193 in Melbourne, Australia, in front of 56,000 fans. wins. Holly entered as a massive underdog. The Vegas odds were brutal. Most commentators thought she'd be finished in the first round. But inside her corner, the mood was calm, calculated. She had spent months breaking down Rousey's habits, footage analysis, game planning, visualization. Holm's team had built the perfect plan, and Holly had drilled it until it became instinct. What followed is one of the greatest upsets in sports history. Holm dominated from the opening bell. Rousey looked confused, desperate. Then, in the second round, it happened. A clean left head kick that crumpled the champion to the canvas. The stadium exploded. The world gasped. And Holly Holm went from underdog to immortal in 1 second. But what no one knew was that this moment, this highest high, would also mark the beginning of a tragic downfall. Because when you shock the world, expectations become impossible. When you dethrone a superstar, the target on your back becomes too heavy to carry. And Holly Holm was about to find that out the hard way. Only 4 months after her history-making victory, Holly Holm stepped into the octagon for her first title defense. The opponent? Miesha Tate, an experienced, durable wrestler with a chip on her shoulder. Holm was winning the fight. She kept Tate at distance, stuffed takedowns, picked her apart with punches. But in the 5th and final round, disaster struck. Holm got caught in a rear naked choke. She refused to tap. She went out cold. And just like that, the title was gone. From champion to dethroned in one mistake. The media immediately flipped the narrative. Maybe Holm wasn't as dominant as we thought. Was the Rousey win a fluke? Suddenly, the world that had celebrated her was now dissecting her downfall, and the losses kept coming. Next came Valentina Shevchenko, one of the most skilled strikers in MMA history. Holm lost a decision. Then Germaine de Randamie, another decision loss, this time for a vacant featherweight title. Holly had gone from the sport's golden girl to a 3-fight skid. The psychological weight was immense. In post-fight interviews, you could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the self-doubt. "I'm not here to be average," she once said. "And right now, I'm not doing anything great." She kept chasing redemption. A head kick win over Bethe Correa gave fans hope. But then came Cyborg, then Amanda Nunes. Another loss, another knockout, and this time, it hurt more than just her reputation. Nunes had beaten Holm with the same move that made Holly famous, a left head kick. It was as symbolic as it was brutal. The torch had been passed, the new era had begun. Outside the cage, things weren't any better. In 2019, after 7 years of marriage, Holly filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences, the same stability she once spoke about in interviews. Her faith, her family, her support system was quietly unraveling. But she never stopped fighting. That's the tragic part. While others would have stepped away, Holm kept going, kept hoping, kept preparing for a moment that would never come again. Because when your greatest victory defines your entire legacy, how do you live with the years that follow it? Holly Holm was never one to crumble under pressure. After enduring a string of soul-crushing losses, most fighters would have retired, but not her. Instead, she did what she always did, put her head down and went back to work. She was no longer the sport's shiny new icon. She wasn't headlining pay-per-views or drawing massive crowds, but she was still fighting and winning. In 2020, she delivered a dominant 5-round performance against Irene Aldana that left critics stunned. At 38, she looked sharp, strategic, and surgical. The old Holly Holm wasn't gone. She was just adapting. But underneath the surface, something was changing. The explosiveness wasn't the same. The recovery time between fights was getting longer. After that win, she was scheduled to fight Juliana Pena, another dangerous up-and-comer. But the fight was pulled when Holm was diagnosed with a serious kidney issue called hydronephrosis. A few months later, she suffered a knee injury. The years of abuse on her body, from both boxing and MMA, were starting to show. It wasn't just about who she was fighting anymore. It was about whether she could even make it to the octagon. When Holm finally returned, it wasn't to the fanfare she once received. She faced Ketlin Vieira in a quiet main event in May 2022, and once again, she looked solid, calm, composed. Most media outlets had her winning, but the judges saw it differently. A split decision loss, another blow, another opportunity snatched away in silence. She was now stuck in a cruel limbo, not good enough to win consistently, but still too good to ignore. And that's where it gets tragic. tragic. Fighters like Holm get caught in this no-man's land. They aren't contenders, but they aren't washed up either. The UFC keeps them on the roster for name value, but the matchmaking is unforgiving. Every opponent is younger, fresher, hungrier, and there's no soft landing. She signed a new 6-fight deal anyway, not because she needed the money, but because she still believed she had something left to prove. What most people didn't understand is that for Holm, walking away would have felt like giving up on her identity. Fighting wasn't just a career, it was her entire sense of self. But how long can someone outrun the clock before the toll becomes permanent? At a certain point, the media stopped asking if Holly Holm would return to the top and started asking if she should retire altogether. The narrative had changed. Where once she was called a pioneer, now people whispered about her stubbornness. Why is she still fighting? Is she chasing something that doesn't exist anymore? And then came the fight that lit that conversation on fire. In July 2023, Holm took on Mayra Bueno Silva. It was a dangerous matchup. Silva was young, confident, and on a finishing streak. Holm came in with veteran poise, but the fight didn't go her way. Midway through the second round, she was caught in a standing ninja choke, an obscure submission, not even considered high percentage. Holm didn't tap at first. She fought it, but seconds later, her hand tapped against Silva's side and the fight was over. The moment was hard to watch. For fans who remembered her head-kicking Rousey into oblivion, seeing Holm trapped in a standing choke by a rising prospect felt like watching a queen lose her crown. Again, commentators and fighters alike began speculating. Had Holm stayed too long? Even the post-fight fallout was messy. Silva tested positive for a banned substance. The bout was overturned to a no contest. Officially, the loss didn't exist, but unofficially, the damage was already done. The UFC still booked Silva into a title fight. Holm was left in limbo, forgotten in the wake. Fan sentiment shifted. Social media turned ruthless. She's cooked. She's embarrassing herself. She's ruining her legacy. The same people who once begged for her autograph now begged her to walk away. Even Dana White, who had long praised her, began nudging her toward retirement. In press conferences, he called her a legend, but his tone suggested finality, the kind of reverence reserved for those whose story is over. But Holm didn't take the hint. She didn't slow down. Instead, she agreed to fight Kayla Harrison, an Olympic judoka, younger, heavier, and undefeated. Why? Because some legends don't know how to quit. They only know how to fight, even if the fight is no longer in their favor. When Holly Holm stepped into the cage at UFC 300, it didn't feel like a comeback. It felt like a farewell. The stakes were unspoken but heavy. This was Kayla Harrison's UFC debut, and the organization was clearly setting up a coronation. Harrison, a two-time Olympic gold medalist, was being positioned as the next dominant force in women's MMA. And who better to pass the torch than a former champion? A household name who had once slain giants? Holly Holm was being used quietly, symbolically, and perhaps she knew it. The fight was quick and brutal. From the opening bell, Harrison imposed her size and strength. She dragged Holm to the canvas repeatedly, ground and pound, pressure, control. Holm never got a chance to show her skill. In round 2, Harrison took her back and locked in a rear naked choke. Holm tapped at 147. The same move that had haunted her since the Tate fight had come back one last time. The crowd applauded Harrison, but as Holm sat on her stool, bruised and breathless, there was a quiet sadness in the air, something final, something mournful. Dana White was asked afterward what he thought. His response was respectful, but clear. I would love to see Holly retire. This wasn't just a loss. This was closure, but Holly wasn't ready to accept it. A few weeks later, news broke. She had requested her release from the UFC. 2 fights remained on her contract. She wanted out. It wasn't that she was done fighting. It was that she wanted to keep fighting somewhere else. Her team claimed she was exploring options. Maybe boxing, maybe another MMA organization, maybe bare knuckle. It didn't matter. Because what mattered was this. Holly Holm, at 41 years old, still couldn't let go. And that's where the real tragedy lives. Not in the knockout, not in the record, but in the refusal to walk away from something that no longer loves you back. After the loss to Kayla Harrison at UFC 300, most assumed Holly Holm would quietly announce her retirement. She had nothing left to prove. She had been a champion in 2 sports. She had headlined sold-out arenas. She had gone the distance with the best in the world and had already secured her place in history. But in a move that shocked even her closest fans, Holly Holm didn't just stay silent. She requested her release from the UFC. And she got it. On paper, she still had 2 fights left on her contract, but behind the scenes, she was ready to leave the organization that had made her a global name. There was no scandal, no feud. She just walked away. Not from fighting, but from that chapter. The chapter that had seen her rise to glory and slowly spiral into heartbreak. And now, for the first time in nearly a decade, Holly Holm was a free agent. Her management team began carefully wording her next move. She's not done, they said. She still wants to compete. She still feels healthy. The word retirement was never mentioned, not once. In fact, rumors began swirling. Would she go back to boxing? Could she sign with a smaller promotion like Bellator or PFL? Some even speculated she might try bare-knuckle boxing, a brutal, unforgiving arena that has become a strange refuge for aging fighters trying to hold on to relevance. But while the headlines were speculating, something much deeper was happening to Holly. She wasn't chasing a belt anymore. She wasn't chasing revenge. She was chasing something far more elusive: identity. Holm had spent nearly 25 years of her life in combat sports. Every decision, every relationship, every life choice was built around training camps, weight cuts, and fight dates. Take that away, and what's left? This is where the real tragedy sharpens. Because it's not the punch that breaks you, it's what happens after the final bell. Holly Holm is now a woman without a corner, no contract, no clear opponent, no crowd, just a name, a body of work, and a void. And when the cheering stops, many fighters realize they never planned for the silence. She had become so used to preparing for war, she forgot how to live in peace. There's an old saying in combat sports: you're only as good as your last fight. But for Holly Holm, she's only ever been remembered for one fight, one head kick, one upset, one night in 2015 that shook the MMA world and made her a legend. And as poetic as it sounds, that moment has quietly become her curse. Because no matter what Holly has done since, no matter how many times she tried to climb the rankings again, no matter how many late career wins she scraped together, it all gets measured against that one iconic knockout of Ronda Rousey. And anything short of that feels like failure. That's the weight of a legacy that peaked too fast. She's the fighter who ruined Ronda's empire, yes, but that label also buried everything else she accomplished. Her 33 boxing wins, her multiple title defenses across 3 weight classes, her Hall of Fame induction, all forgotten, living in the shadow of that one perfect moment. It's a strange kind of prison, to be worshipped for something you can never replicate again. Even fans who love her are guilty of this. Every highlight reel starts with that kick. Every article that mentions her ends with that fight. And every opponent she faced after it, Tate, Shevchenko, Nunes, Cyborg, saw her not as a current threat, but as the woman who once was great, the Rousey Slayer. Imagine waking up every day being reminded that your best moment happened 10 years ago, that nothing you've done since could ever top it. And worse, that the industry around you has moved on. New stars, new styles, new champions. The game evolved, but her defining identity stayed frozen in time. That's what haunts Holly Holm. Not just the losses, not just the aging, but the fact that her own legacy became a box she can't escape. And now, with the octagon doors closed behind her and no clear destination ahead, that moment follows her like a shadow, glorious and heavy. The same kick that made her immortal also made it impossible to be anything else. Now, in 2025, Holly Holm is standing in the most difficult arena of all, life after the fight. She's 41 years old, divorced, no children, no promotional deal. Her future is a blank slate, and that's more terrifying than any opponent she's ever faced. She has not formally retired. That word seems allergic to her, and maybe she never will. Maybe she'll keep training, until the gym locks its door. Maybe she'll take a low-profile fight overseas. Or maybe, one day, she'll just stop showing up quietly. No farewell tour, no microphone speech, just disappear from the headline. But even if she never fights again, her body already carries the cost. Years of damage, surgery, concussions, chronic pain. There's no pension for fighters, no safety net, only the echoes of a crowd that doesn't exist anymore. And that's the cold reality. When your entire worth has been built on what your body can do, aging isn't just sad, it's traumatic. What happens to a warrior when the war is over? What do you do when the cage isn't calling anymore? For Holly Holm, the tragedy isn't that she lost, it's that she gave everything she had. And when the lights dimmed, there was no roadmap home. There was no celebration of her endurance, no appreciation for her quiet grace. There was only the next prospect, the next headliner, the next woman in line to be cheered, until she too gets forgotten. But maybe that's why Holly Holm still holds on. Not for the belt, not for the fame, but for the fight itself. Because fighting, in all its chaos and pain, has always made sense to her. It gave her structure, purpose, identity. And as long as she keeps lacing up the gloves, even if it's just for sparring, she never has to ask the terrifying question, who am I without this? And that is what makes her story not just tragic, but profoundly human.